I want to thank everybody for being here and remembering Bill Pitwood. And to start our service, we have ladies of the United States Naval Station here to provide military honors in Bill's memory. Thank you, ladies. At this time, at the family's request, they would like to open the floor up for anybody who would like to share a memory of Bill. And you don't have to come up here. Lisa's going to wander throughout. You want to raise your hand, you can share a memory, and she'll bring you the microphone. You can share that out loud so everybody can hear that. And while we're doing that, we got some special music the family selected that will be playing in the background.
Thanks, Lisa. This music you're about to hear was selected from Bill's last week's live. He and I would go through his entire collection of audio CDs and cassette tapes. Yeah, he still got cassette tapes. So he picked the songs that would really mean a lot to him. So we handpicked these songs, and these good folks here at this facility are going to play those for you. Though they may not be a traditional memorial type song, they meant a lot to Bill, and that's what's important. I hope you folks appreciate them for what they represented to Bill. Each one of these songs had a unique memory associated with it. If not one memory, at least several memories. And so I'd like to tell you personally how my friend Wild Bill came into my life and how perhaps he might have earned that name, Wild Bill. He was a unique individual. I met him in the early 90s when he would come and inspect the welds at the shop where I was a foreman. And during our casual conversations, Bill and I had common ground, both politically and militarily, to develop a bond between us. Bill definitely had another way of looking at the world around him, one that the average American doesn't pay attention to. But in the forge of life, there are things that a man does because he has to do it, not because he wants to. There were events in Bill's life that forged him. One of these events come from his living in Colorado on a ranch. To Bill, living on a ranch and living the agrarian lifestyle was the best life anybody could have. In fact, our third president, Thomas Jefferson, felt the same way. Like Thomas Jefferson, Bill also understood the need for industry. Though he chose the agrarian lifestyle as one that he would like to pursue, he also understood the industrial side of things and how that would move America forward. And indeed, from Thomas Jefferson's time, we did become a great industrial nation. For Bill, who was born in 1939, of parents who had lived through the Depression, still living the ends of the Depression, preceding the war that came to change the world, Bill started to develop into the man he would become. Now, what you have to understand about Bill is he loved being a rancher's son. And it was Bill's good fortune to have grandparents, both maternal and paternal, that lived there in the ranch with them. So Bill's father, during the course of his life of living a hard life of a ranch hand, had grandparents to fall on because they had the patience to talk to a young boy, where a father might be too darn busy to do that. Bill, in his youth on this ranch, come down with polio, and to the family thought that this was a devastating news and probably would debilitate Bill the rest of his life. But one of the benefits of having grandparents living with you is at this time period in American history, there were still Americans alive who were born in the late 1800s, of which his paternal grandmother, of part Indian blood, had been born in the late 1800s. And as a girl or in her youth, she must have picked up the Indian way of healing herbs and salves and poultices, because she took Bill aside, even though he'd been diagnosed with polio and told he wasn't going to be walking like the other boys. She took him aside and applied her knowledge of alternative medicines to heal Bill, and within a short period of time, compared to being crippled for life, Bill was able to walk on his own, walk well enough to join the Navy. So you got to pretty much be able to walk around. His grandmother had a heavy influence on him. That kind of forged Bill's belief about alternative methods of healing being viable. And to the end of his days, he railed against the fact that Western medicine seems to pay little attention to those types of resources available. And he thanked God that he had his grandmother there to teach him that. So he didn't have a problem with working hard on a ranch. In fact, he kind of followed the old Western proverb of, you need to learn to ride straight or ride hard, shoot straight, and speak the truth. And that's how Bill was raised as a young boy. That's one of the crucibles that forged his character. Shortly after that, he entered into another phase in his life when the ranch was lost due to banking and finance and laws. And you know how most of our farmers and ranchers lose their land. So this happened to his family. And they were displaced and moved to California. Though they still had a somewhat agrarian aspects of life, being the firstborn son and the prince of the kingdom was no longer available for him. He had to actually become civilized. That was a hard job for Bill. He didn't get the nickname Wild Bill by being meek and mild. So he did his duty there, and he lived his life, and he got in trouble sometimes in school, like all of us guys especially do, you know, being a young man. The second event that caused Bill to become the man he is happened, unfortunately, in his life when most of us are thinking about high school proms, girls, cars, and parties. Life raised an event in Bill's life that caused Bill to make a decision, a split-second decision, to use a handgun to kill another man. So you can imagine Bill's stance on the Second Amendment. Very pro Second Amendment, because he understood that in a situation where it's justifiable and you have no other choice, you have to do what you have to do. Bill was a man that would not let other men disrespect him or lay their hands upon him. But in this circumstance, at his youth, it still had police intervention, but they determined it was justifiable. So Bill exited that event in his life with a devout belief that people need to be armed for this very reason. And when you think about the time period, you think even back then in the late 50s and early 60s, there were violence. And a man has to deal with it. And Bill did. So that event sealed his belief in the proper use of handguns, and you might even jokingly call the proper use of trigger control and gun control. The third event in Bill's life that caused him to forge a character that all of us who know him now could see, and that was his tour of duty in the Navy. I often asked him how a cowboy from Colorado could end up in the United States Navy. You'd think the Marines would have had plenty of opportunity to apply Bill's writing and speaking the truth and shooting straight. But Bill had I used to tease him because I'm an ex-Marine. I used to tease him about his debility, and that is that his IQ was too high to make him usable for being the frontline type of guy. They had better use for him. That better use for Bill, with his natural intelligence and his ability to improvise, in his welding skills and his diving skills, what you learned in the Navy, made him a prime candidate for one of the new outfits that were being formed. And this outfit that was formed was the parents of what became known as the Navy SEALs. So we're talking a time period in 1960 and 1961 before President Kennedy devised the plan about the Navy SEALs. Bill was introduced into a world of darkness and hostile ground, and he was deployed to Vietnam. It was not called Vietnam then, like it became a household word for America afterwards. So Bill, in his youth, with these Navy skills he's acquired, was part of the teams that went ashore on those dark and hostile beaches and set up communication and radar direction finding units for our military. And in that capacity, Bill discovered something that haunted him for the rest of his life. It's difficult for the average American to understand that for whatever reasons history tells you, Vietnam was like no other war that America had ever fought. Yes, America had been in jungle wars and they'd done things in Nicaragua and South America, but this was the first time that we had this type of an opponent. And the situation at hand that Bill discovered was American people were lied to as to what was going on over there. Because it wasn't yet an active hostile zone, not like we would know Vietnam. In fact, it's not even on his record as Vietnam. You would have to know the man and the history behind what had happened to understand that. When Bill was there, he was in what we now call what we would have called in the Vietnam War, the North Vietnam, outside of Haiphong Harbor. Bill saw things happen there that clearly were contradictory to what the President of the United States was telling people, what the media was telling people, and that literally destroyed his innocence. He no longer was a cowboy from Colorado. He now was jaded and used up. But of course, at that youth, at that age, you still got your whole life ahead of you. So he kind of buried those feelings, and he went on back to the United States and lived a life of working in industry. He always missed the agrarian life, and he always meant to get back to it and to take his family with him. One of the regrets he held to his dying day was that he never got his son involved in that type of a lifestyle. Perhaps he said, maybe I didn't even raise my son right, which I'll correct that belief in a few minutes when I get to the point about his son. And his son is a good man. So when Bill came back to the United States, he went to work for the government. Again, he saw more issues at hand. People were lied to. And it just that, coupled with the fact that Bill had always been a protector of the underdog. He was an advocate for the underdog. If you were fighting the big beast, he was your buddy. He was there for you. Right or wrong, he understood that. The loss of the ranch of his childhood was due to big corporations buying out the smaller corporations. And he would rail against the fact that in our world today of ease and pleasure, where we go to a super mall to do our shopping, what we've given up to do that, we seem to have forgot all the mom and pop stores and the small truck farmers and the small people. Somehow he railed against the fact that somehow we've developed a worship of the bottom dollar rather than what is right or wrong. And that bothered Bill. You can imagine when he took these attitudes into the work world, that there were many times he didn't get that promotion he should have, or that pay raise he should have, or put up with what he could have to get a better position in the company, that he actually spoke the truth and told people what he thought and where they were flawed. In fact, I'm not going to use the word, but he would tell them often how deeply flawed they were. And that, there's not many people in the world today that like to be told how flawed they are. But then again, there's not many Wild Bill Pitwoods. And now that we've lost him, we're worse off for it. Because of his grandmother's influence on him when he was a boy, he developed this deep, deep belief that we all need to pay attention to our health in respects to Western medicine. To his dying day, he would tell me that he regretted the procedures he went through to fight this cancer. Now, rightly or wrongly, accurately or factually, I'm just talking about the man's belief. He'd been told that the type of cancer he had, if you have to have cancer, that was the type to have because it was curable. Well, if that were true, we wouldn't be here today. But he gave it, he tried it. He used the Providence facility here in Washington, and he enjoyed those people. He thought the people working there were good. The frontline people, just like I told you, he was always for the little guy. He liked the frontline people. They treated him great. They often were the highlight of his day throughout the year that we were going through these therapies and treatments. At one point, he had been assigned to do a case of radiation for 15 days. 20 days, 15 minutes a day for 20 days. That gave Bill pause. He didn't mind doing the chemo, not in the sense that he wasn't going to do the chemo. I mean, obviously he didn't like the idea of chemicals being poured into him, but he saw it as a tool to go ahead and fight this cancer. When he had to do the radiation, it gave him pause. Having worked with the Atomic Energy Commission in his career and being fully aware of what the dangers of radiation and how this fits in to medicine nowadays, he was very concerned. And he was getting physically to the point where he couldn't really not even as much as lie down on the table and put his arms above his head for the procedure. So every day we did that for those 20 days straight. He had to take some pain pills to go there, to sit through the procedure, and then it would haunt him until the next day where he had to do it again. But we made all the required trips. We did what we were told to do, and the people were good, and they spoke well of Bill. And for the most part, he maintained high spirits because he's got a lot of friends, as you can see, of whom he didn't mind telling what he was thinking about when it came to medicine. In fact, I remember one conversation he was having with his oncologist, a doctor by the name of Wendy Wong. And he was telling Wendy Wong that the American Murder Association is what he called the AMA, the American Murder Association, and the FDA, that they were all criminals the way they treated Americans, and we were nothing but just a source of revenue for them, and it wouldn't be in their best interest to cure cancer because then the money tree would dry up and they wouldn't have all their money to deal with anymore. And she was a very polite Asian girl, and she sat there and she listened to Bill, but before he could even conclude his speech from his hospital bed, she started shaking her head no, and she told him that she didn't agree. In fact, from what she could tell from Bill's records, this was in April we were having this conversation, April of this year. He started the chemo in September of last year. She told him plainly that if he had not taken the chemo in September, he wouldn't be alive today to have this conversation. So that actually gave Bill cause to reflect on things, and he was more willing to go through with the second round of chemo. But to his dying days, he regretted the fact he didn't try to handle this with alternative methods. Now, I don't want this to be a speech about the American Medical Association. I just wanted to tell you why Bill felt the way he did and how he handled the situation with cancer and what life had meant to him up to the point he had cancer. It had always been his intention to get his family and friends someplace rural where they could have a farm. He preached against the dangers of genetically modified food because he, you must remember, born in 1939 and raised on a farm ranch, that he actually knew what food was supposed to taste like, what an egg was supposed to taste like, what bacon and beefsteak, what they were supposed to taste like, contrasted with what they have today. And because of his age and when he was born and the life he lived, he's one of the people that could tell the difference between what we're fed today and what was supposed to be the type of diet you wanted to eat, the type of lifestyle you even wanted to live. To his dying day, he regretted not doing alternative means, though he did admit that that takes a certain amount of resources to do financially, and you must have family and friends that will help you with that. That's how we kind of get corralled into a situation where we're taking medicine for something that's bothering us, some illness, some symptom that we have, and it's not really addressing us as human beings. We're just an illness that needs to be addressed. So Bill, to the end, he always regretted that. Now, as far as Bill's son, Bill brought his son to work the shop. I was a general foreman. His son was 16, high school, and I had gone through a lot of employees, a lot of teenage guys, young guys in their 20s. None of them seemed to have had the basic capacity to come to work at the start of the shift and work all day long. For some mysterious reason, they often were ill, but always on Mondays or Fridays. Never Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays. Bill brought his son Don in, and I don't know if I've ever told Don this, but the first minute I laid eyes on him, I liked him. He had that smart-ass attitude that I found that would be useful there in that shop, and that he would be all right. When he came to work for me, he started out as a helper. And I've got to tell you, good people, now it causes me immense pleasure to tell you that now the shop that hired him 16 years ago, Don is now their major competitor in the trade, because he himself is a shop owner, a fabricator, and an erector. And I just think that's poetic justice. So when Bill would tell, thank you. When Bill would worry about how his son turned out, I'd have to admit that Don is pretty low on the cowboy lore and the ride hard, shoot straight type stuff, but he's got a lot of potential. On the other hand, he's a real good man in the industrial side of life that Thomas Jefferson and Bill Pitt thought would move America forward in the world and make them a great nation. And Bill often railed against the fact this country today does not have the infrastructure it needs to maintain our roads and bridges and transportation. He grieved over the loss of the merchant fleets. Whatever happened to the railroads? What's going on in this country, he'd say. Why is all our manufacturing being outsourced overseas? We don't have the ability to do what we used to that made us great during World War II or World War I. We don't have that ability. Instead, it's a danger. We need to be aware that this is going to cause us a problem in the future. When we think of how our major industrial work has been outsourced overseas, and maybe it's just the way Bill and I used to think, but you couple that with the fact that we're eating all this genetically modified food, and we're all involved in this the president's new health care issue, and the baby boomers are the largest demographic population here in the United States. there's more of us than there are of the people supporting us. And it comes to where something's got to come apart. Something's got to collapse. And Bill always predicted that this would happen. So next to the last night he and I were together, I'm Dan Dwyer, by the way. I was his caregiver. I lived there with him. In our private conversations in the wee hours of the mornings, he admitted that he was ready to go. His good friend Tanya James over here with their son Allie and Wyatt had brought him the good news of Jesus, and she brought a great deal of comfort to his life. And at the end, he said he was ready to go. He accepted it and was ready to go. But what I didn't tell you, good folks, is that Bill still has the last word. He made his son and I promise to take him back to Colorado, take his cremains back there and put him on a mountain pass. He named the pass, and on researching this pass, it turns out it's 12,126 feet above sea level, and only a gravel road goes over the top of the mountain. It's not like going over Stevens Pass. So what I'm getting at, good folks, is that Bill needed to go home to Jesus in time for Dawn and I to take a warm month out of the summer to get back to Colorado. Because if we had waited, then we'd have to wait till next year. But he did tell me he didn't mind waiting, hanging around for a year until his son and I got to it. But that's where he wanted to go. So armed with that, his remains and a trout pole, Don and I are headed back to Colorado here pretty soon. Take his dad back home, back to the mountains of his youth, maybe back home where whatever happens to us afterlife, that he'll find pleasure and goodness in that. And I always wish the best for him. And now that he's out of my life, I've got a big hole in my life, and I'll miss him terribly. And I not only do I grieve the loss of Bill, but also of the plans and dreams and hopes he had to keep his family together, his son, his daughter-in-law, Kelly Jordan, his grandson and his daughter. He knew that they would be better off if they lived on a ranch. So that's all I wanted to share with you, good folks. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that'd like to come up and share? I can bring the microphone to you if you want to stay seated.
I got a quick story about Bill. Probably make you laugh, maybe make you cringe a little bit. Back in high school, he was always the guy you can go to his house and hang out. You know, he'll tell jokes, horrible jokes, but he'd try. One night of our many nights of eating Taco Bell, Don, Doug, and I, like 10 bean burritos, you know, whatever. Went home, Don's house, passed out sleeping. 8 a.m. rolls around, sure enough, Don tears ass. Loud. I mean loud. So him and Doug decided to have a fart contest. So they both do it, loudly, loudly, loudly. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, Bill comes in the door in underwear, and tidy whities, and his gun holster. He says, "I expect to see one of you guys floating around in here." And then he ran out, plugging his nose. But that was a good memory of Bill. And Don, I'm sorry for your loss. He's a good father, a good man. And but yeah, if anyone knew him, it was open door, jokes, farts, whatever it may be. Anyway, that's all I gotta say.
My name is Dan Shepley. I live up in Arlington. Bill was one of my good friends. I think I've known him for about 15 years. I have a lot of kids, and we did a lot of joke telling together and alternative health stuff and alternative legal stuff, alternative money stuff, alternative thinking, research, we called it. So I miss him. You know, in life, you get some spicy friends, and Bill added a lot of flavor to our life. One day I was working on picnic tables in my garage, and I was just building them to sell, and a friend of mine showed up who had a ministry to Vietnam. And about a half an hour later, my friend Bill Pitwood rolled in, and I said to my friend from Vietnam, I said, "Hey, come meet Bill. I think he's a Vietnam vet." Well, Bill proceeded to tell me the story when he was in Vietnam. I don't know if you ever heard this one. He was running point somewhere, and he said he walked out into this clearing, and he went stone deaf. And he turned around and went back to his leader and said, "Something wrong out here." And the leader said, "Nah, there's nothing wrong. Get out there." He said, "I'm not going out there again." And the leader went out there, and he turned around and went stone deaf and walked back in. Well, my friend Ray, who would pray over Vietnam vets, and he asked Bill, "Can I pray over you?" And he said, "Sure." And I never felt anything like this before. And Bill and Ray and I were all crying when we were done. Because, as you know, Bill officially was never in Vietnam, but he was. So, you know, the stories and the things that we told. And my family owes Bill a debt of gratitude because he's the one that introduced my wife to Bowen, which is a pain therapy. Now, Bill was getting a massage every week or so from these girls in Bothell. And being a bachelor, I think he liked that touch. He needed it probably. And so one day this girl said, "We're not doing massage today, we're doing this Bowen." He said, "Dan, it was awful." He said, "You just touched me a little bit here and there." He said, "Go home." And then he said, "But all my pain went away the next day." And so I said, "Give me their number. I had this foot pain that won't go away." And I went down there and got a session, and I signed my wife up to be a Bowen practitioner, and she's been a Bowen practitioner ever since. So I owe that to Bill. And again, I'm going to miss the good friendships that we had, and again, he had a lot of flavor to our lives.
Is there anybody else that would like to share?
It's simple.
No? Okay.
How y'all doing? I know Bill for probably about 15 years. First time I met Bill, me and Don weren't always getting along. Really, I was like, "Oh, we're gonna come get you." And I hear about his crazy dad, and we're like, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't go over there." But anyways, as time grew on, we lost a couple of buddies, and we all came closer. And I met Bill right around really met Bill, I think it was 2000, 2001. And at first, I was like, "Oh man," because I'm like a black dude. He is, and I didn't know what to expect from Bill. But when I met Bill, he was the most kind-hearted, warm guy, accepting, And I used to call him the Grand Wizard, there's for other reasons I don't want to get into. But me and Bill were friends since then. I mean, since the first time I met him, it was kind of a bizarre friendship. You wouldn't think that you would see me and Bill riding around in the truck going to do something. Like, "Hey, wait a minute, what the hell?" But honestly, Bill was a good dude, and it's hard to think that we're without him now. I went and saw him in the hospital about a month ago or whenever it was. I told him I was going to come back, but my work schedule is kind of difficult for me to go back and forth during the day, and I kind of regret that. But one thing Bill did say, the gentleman did say, is that he worried about raising his son right. And if anybody knows Don, that that's not true. Okay, Don's a good dude. He's a good father. He's a great friend, great husband. Well, soon to be. That's Bill's wish. Miss Pitwood, he told me. But I just want to say about my friend, he was a good man, and that he'll be missed. And I actually got one of my grades in college because of Bill. He let me do a report on him. But Bill's a good man, and he raised a wonderful son. So that's all I got to say.
Is there anybody else that would like to share?
I'm going to miss my peaches, my cherries, my oranges, all my wonderful fruit he used to bring me from over the mountains. and he never asked for a dime. Just sit down at our table and eat my spaghetti. And him and I used to talk about Don. My son and Don hung out together, and I always would give Bill some motherly advice towards Don, how to handle him and what to say and reverse psychology. So I'm going to miss your dad.
I'm gonna go ahead and try to do this.
Does anybody else want to say anything? Oh, okay.
I'll just reiterate a lot that some other people have said today. Remembering Bill, you can tell a man's moral strength by the way he treats those weaker than himself. You can tell a man's heart by the way he treats children, animals, his neighbors, and his fellow man. We didn't know Bill's past. We knew him for just a few years as a friend and neighbor. We know he had a kind, generous heart. Each summer, Bill would drive over the pass and bring back fruit and vegetables, which he shared with his grateful neighbors. He did this each year as long as he was able, a testimony to his big heart. My husband and I prayed with Bill while he was in the hospital. He said he had been baptized, and he indicated that he was ready to go. We are thankful, Bill, that you are free of pain and misery. But we're sad to see you go, and you will not be forgotten, for we will all miss you.
Is there anybody else who would like to tell a story, share a memory?
Please forgive me if I break up. So, my daughter wants me to talk, so I'm giving it a try. My daughter called Bill Uncle Feathers because he brought her a lot of feathers, peacock feathers and different stuff. Anyways, I think that we can all believe that the big thing about Bill is that you know Bill through other people. Everybody thought highly of him, and if you talk about Bill, it's a positive remembrance. Anyways, I worked with Bill at Harris and Associates. He's a great guy, so did Jeff, and so did Leroy. And Bill would come down to the house, and he'd bring bottles of water, and we live in Oregon, and he'd bring up. He gave us his water machine because it was so important to him that we had good water. I met Don. He brought him over to the office, and I just like, here's another Bill. You know, he was really nice guy, and he tried to help us with stuff. Bill was always trying to help us stuff, and as long as I knew him, I've only known him 5-6 years, but anyways. Positive experience and really positive for my family, and yeah, we'll miss Bill a lot. Thank you for letting us be here today.
Hi, my name is Desi, and I think I knew Bill a lot different from everybody here. My days were Bill. I met Bill through friends. My friend Sherry, her mom. My most memorable time was we used to talk so raunchy that poor Bill would just get up and walk away from us. We were bad. My last day I was with Bill, we were at my friend's house. We were talking so bad about girl toys. Poor Bill. He turned so red, and he looked at us and he said, "You guys are worse than drunken sailors," and walked out of the door and just shook his head and said, shame on you girls. We embarrassed him very bad. So those are my memories of Bill. I knew the wild Bill. We had some, their children here, so I can't discuss the conversations we had, but that is how I got to know Bill. And I met Don probably, you were what, 16 maybe? And I've known Don since then. I'm sorry for your loss. I will miss your dad, but I am going to miss our girl conversations with him.
Is there anybody else?
My name is David. And I first met Bill before I met Don through Dan Dwyer, your MC of the ceremonies here. And I was introduced to Bill as Wild Bill, and I didn't understand exactly why until I got to know him a little more. At times I would go into the office. I was an underling to Dan's foreman before Don came to our shop, and I'd hear Dan and Bill discussing things, and usually it was guns or loading ammunition. And I'd leave, you know, and anytime I'd walk in there, it was something to that extent. Well, then Don came along, and he and I have had a long relationship since then, a very good relationship, I'm pleased to say. But I wanted to relay this one last time. I saw Bill a few weeks ago in his lavish living room, bedroom that Dan and his roommate set up for him. And I stayed for a couple hours visiting, and Bill's there, and I realized after a while that he's sitting there reading a Guns and Ammo magazine. And now Bill knows I'm a bleeding heart. And I said, "What are you doing reading that?" And he says, "Well, I'd rather be reading this than some G.D. Obama, S-H-I-T, like you all can't spell." And realizing whose presence I was in and what time it was, and I said, "Look, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of arguing with you right here, although I could." And he says, "Bring it on." And I said, no. And when I stayed and I visited, and I didn't see Bill a lot in the 16, 17 years that I knew him, but anytime I saw him, I'd see him at the bank periodically. There was always a hug waiting for you, because that's the kind of man he was. And he was a good friend, regardless of how many times I'd seen him, and always spoke very highly of his son. And the last time I saw him, he said something to me encouraging about Donnie, and I said, "Well, you have to tell Donnie that." And he thought for a second. He said, "Okay." And I hope he did. And I also, although not as great a friend or as long-standing a friend as many people in here, he will also be a loss to me, because he's a loss to you and is a loss to my friends. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to share? No? Oh, okay.
Well, everybody knows who I am, so I'll cut to the chase. The thing I remember about Bill the most, he was a very, very kind man. He'd do anything under the sun for his son. His son turned out to be a very respectable man, you know. I fell upon some bad times, got into some trouble, and Bill was always there to talk to me. Hell, the guy even drove me to work. Lost my license out having fun every night, you know, and that all came to an end. But Bill was the one that, you know, drove me to work every day. I mean, I didn't have a license, I would have lost my job. He not only did that, I mean, he gave me a place to live. And I lived there for many, many, many years, and we all just kind of formed this huge family of people, you know, and it's you know, like a second parent. And, you know, I definitely will truly miss Bill, and, you know, I hope the legacy of Bill Pitwood lives on through Don and his son and Bria as well. Thank you.